This is pretty bad. I'm not any big fan of Neil Cavuto, the Fox News and Fox Business host, or of Fox News or of Fox Business, but I have a clip here where Neil Cavuto did something that I like to do, which is during an interview, you ask really simple questions that just sort of force people to indicate whether they have any clue at all about what they're talking about. A young student named Keely Mullen, who's an organizer for the Million Student March, which is organizing for free public college and cancellation of student debt and a $15 an hour minimum wage for all campus employees. She was interviewed by Neil Cavuto. She was asked a super simple question, which is, okay, here's the list of the stuff you want. How is this going to be paid for? And it did not go well for her, which is really sad because I support most of the proposals she's talking about. I think they're good proposals. And I think there are answers to how it would be paid for. And Bernie Sanders has talked about that. Brace yourselves. I really do feel bad for her. Stick with this, okay? Let's take a listen.
So what do you
Totally
want here?
fine.
What do you want?
Well, so the movement, the Million Student March, is a movement for a more equitable and fair system of education, as opposed to the really corporate model that we have right now. So the three core demands of the National Day of Action are free public college, a cancellation of student debt, and a $15 an hour minimum wage for people who work on the campus.
And how's that going to be paid?
Great question. I mean, you know, so I'm not sure if you're talking on like a national level or at particular schools. I can sort of touch on both. At
Well,
my
if you wanted
university,
all that
Northeastern
stuff,
University,
someone asked to pick up the tab. Who would that be?
the 1% of people in society that are hoarding the wealth and really sort of causing a catastrophe that students are facing. I mean, we have a relationship right now where 1% of the population owns more wealth than the 99% combined.
All right, so if the
and that
1%,
relationship,
Kelly, if the 1% just had their taxes raised a few years ago back to almost 40%, then to pay for the health care law, they had them raised another few percentage points. Then they had their deductions limited to raise another couple points, where depending on the state or locality, they're pushing over about 50% in taxes. How much higher do you think? How much more do you think they should pay?
I think enough until we have a system where not 1 in 2 American families are threatened with poverty.
So where do they go? Let's say if you tax them, they're smart folks, these people, these 1% hoarders, right? So if they leave here, then who's going to pay for all this stuff that you want?
If they leave
the country.
I mean, there's always going to be a 1% in the U.S. The U.S. is like the bastion of capitalism and its success, and I think
Do you
that,
think the 1% can pay for all of this?
Absolutely. 85 people in the world hold more wealth than half of the global population.
No, wait a
So
minute.
let's stop it there because it's starting to get bad. There were a couple places where it got bad, right? And the question that often is asked by people like Neil Cavuto is, well, what should the tax rate be on the rich? And that's sort of, that's really the wrong question to be asking. The real approach is, let's talk about the massive accumulation of wealth and income that is happening at the top, and talk about the fact that it doesn't matter if Neil Cavuto says on paper the rates have been increased. The effective tax rate paid by the top 0.1% is not higher than the top 1%, which is not really higher than the top 5%. Once you get into the top 20%, you don't really continue paying a higher effective tax rate. We've looked at the tax numbers. So I think a better approach, Lewis, for Keely would have been, listen, college is basically a necessity to get even a mediocre job, unless you're particularly bright, lucky, born into wealth, or just a total outlier in terms of entrepreneurial ability. That's the reality. Society benefits from a more educated population. We have significant profits in the financial world that are shown to not be stimulative to the economy, and they are concentrating the wealth among the very rich. We are hurting many people through this system. We're going to shut down tax havens for corporations that allow really profitable businesses to pay 0 or negative tax rates. We're going to put in a small but meaningful financial transaction tax, particularly on speculative and risky investments and financing mechanisms. And we're in concert with this going to restructure the entire circle that is easy to get student loans, which makes colleges raise their tuition, which makes it so people get even more student loans, and then they're in jobs that don't pay enough wages to pay off the student loans. That's really the approach. I don't think Keeley saying, well, the rich will just pay for it all. She was not prepared for this.
No, you got to be prepared when you're going on Fox News. You got to be ready to for this type of line of questioning. And you're right. You outlined, what needed to happen, but above, the most important things are increasing taxes on the 1% and corporate taxation. Some of the biggest corporations are instead of paying anything in taxes, are receiving millions of dollars from us. So,
and again, I think that the question about the rate is it's not a good question. It's Neil Cavuto is smart to ask it. I get why he's
even
smart.
Though their rate might be 50% or over, they're not actually paying even close to that.
That's exactly right. As we've shown time and time again, the effective tax rate is very separate. As Warren Buffett has said, he pays a lower effective rate than his secretary. Unrelated to the attacks in Paris, but related in a sense, is that the U.S., the Pentagon, has now announced that it has killed the top ISIS operative in Libya, Wissam al-Zubaydi. The Pentagon announced that they successfully carried out an F-15 aircraft strike. This is the first time that the U.S. has directly gone after ISIS outside of Iraq or Syria. There was some confusion, Lewis, about this headline. The headline read, U.S. kills ISIS leader in Libya. And the understanding for many people was, the leader of all of ISIS was in Libya when he was killed. What this means is that ISIS is fragmented. The Libyan ISIS leader was killed. This has essentially no impact on the Syrian ISIS leader or the general leader of ISIS, or call it what you want. So some confusion around exactly who was killed here.
Yeah, and forgive me, I could not for the life of me find a picture of this guy, probably because the number one before him was killed, and before him was killed, and before him was killed, and now you have, essentially nobodies who are taking over in leadership positions. But correct me if I'm wrong, I think that ISIS is officially only operating out of 3 countries, Libya, Syria, and Iraq, right?
That's correct. And Libya is the country where, and many people may not know this, Libya had sort of the most, Libya presented the most problems for ISIS, significant competition for ISIS in Libya. We have a situation in Libya where most of the Muslims are Sunni, meaning that the country doesn't have the same sort of sectarian tension that we see in Iraq and Syria. And in addition, there's the competition of al-Qaeda fighters and unaffiliated local fighters in Libya. So this is news. This was something that, while not directly related to the attacks in Paris over the weekend, felt like a sort of strong headline. But at the same time, we instantly have those who say, number one, the U.S. simply does not have the legal authority to be carrying out this mission. And at the same time, Lewis, we heard from some people that, and if you don't have to look too far on the internet to see examples of this, some people saying, this is obvious propaganda. This is an obvious response to what is going on in Paris, just to make it seem as though the U.S. is competent. The U.S. could not possibly kill this guy. And when people say that, I find it silly that the same people who say the U.S. government is capable of carrying out these massive coordinated conspiracy theories involving the military and media and law enforcement, when there's something like Sandy Hook or the killing of Osama bin Laden, they're able to carry out that, Lewis, but at the same time, they can't just kill one guy in Libya. It doesn't really make sense.
Especially considering our drone program. We've been doing this for I don't know, 12, 13 years, successfully taking out targets with drones, and innocent civilians, of course, too. I'm not praising it, but, this is nothing new.
Recent interview that is very, very interesting. Donald Trump was interviewed and asked about Ben Carson and some of the things Ben Carson has said, some of the things Ben Carson has written, etc. And Donald Trump decided to sort of compare Ben Carson to a child molester. Now, I can't really do justice to the incredibly nuanced and interesting way in which Donald Trump drew a correlation between Ben Carson and a child molester. So I'm going to play the clip for you from the Aaron Burnett show. Let's listen to Ben Carson being called, being sort of equated to a child molester by Republican candidate Donald Trump.
Well, I don't know. I mean, first of all, I like him. I get along with him very well. I just don't know. And don't forget, this is in his book. I'm not bringing up anything that's not in his book. And, when he says he went after his mother and wanted to hit her in the head with a hammer, that bothers me.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty bad. When he says he's pathological And he says that in the book. I don't say that. And again, I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything other than pathological is a very serious disease. And he said he's pathological. Somebody said he has pathological disease. Other people said he said in the book, and I haven't seen it, I know it's in the book, that he's got a pathological temper or temperament. That's a big problem because you don't cure that. That's like, you know, I could say, they'd say you don't cure, as an example, child molester. You don't cure these people. You don't cure a child molester. There's no cure for it. Pathological, there's no cure for that. Now, I didn't say it. He said it in his book.
Yeah. So if you were playing buzzword bingo during that interview with just the words pathological and cure, you'd be wasted by now, Lewis, if you were playing a drinking game with that. My immediate thought when I saw this was not that there's anything really that interesting in it, other than that infighting among the two Republican leading candidates is a good thing.
Yeah, it is. And Donald Trump is continuing to make outrageous comments. My first thought when I saw this was that whatever he's doing in a tanning booth is looking really strange. He's got this, his eyes look like they're about to, 20 shades lighter than the rest of his face, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah, no, the physical, I don't care. I don't use physical appearance to determine whether someone is a good candidate or not, but Donald Trump's physical appearance here, where his lips and his eyes are not tan and everything else looks like more orange than John Boehner, it is downright bizarre. But to the comments, Ben Carson said when he was younger he had a pathological temper. Now that may have been a lie because most of the stories that CNN has tried to verify from Ben Carson's youth, they've not been able to verify a single one of them. But he never said he was pathological or had a pathological disease, as Donald Trump is talking about here. The more and more that Donald Trump and Ben Carson get involved in a combination of bizarre lies and childish attacks, the more Marco Rubio is going to have a shot at being the nominee.
Yeah, you'd imagine that, I hate to call him a real candidate, but you'd imagine that Rubio should be the guy in this mess of the GOP. But let him go at it.
The other thing that every day is helping Marco Rubio is not only infighting between Donald Trump and Ben Carson, but also Jeb Bush continuing to be a non-factor. And for all the criticisms of Donald Trump referring to Jeb Bush as a low-energy guy, it is really actually insightful in the sense that when I see Jeb Bush talk, and the new thing is Jeb can fix it, whatever, his speeches, they trigger nothing in me emotionally. I see it and I go, I don't even really get very angry with the dumb stuff he says because he's just so low energy. I don't even know that he cares about what he's saying.
Yeah, it doesn't really help. You look back at McCain, and McCain had great energy, right? To some extent. Yeah, I just think he I don't know how else to say it. I think he had a bit more energy, and I think I could see how he fired up people a bit more. Jeb is he's doing nothing.
You might remember our friend, Pastor Steven Anderson from the Faithful Word Baptist Church in Tempe, Arizona. He has prayed for the death of President Obama. He has talked about killing gay people. He knows why God did a bad thing and allowed ISIS to attack Paris last week. It wasn't because ISIS is a religious death cult attempting to bring about the apocalypse. It is not because terrorists were influenced by misguided religious teachings or were bad people or whatever. It is all because Paris is open to apparently adultery. It is because of, quote, faggots. It is because of abortion. We have video from Pastor Steven Anderson. Let's take a look at the first clip.
Says in Proverbs, all they that hate me love death.
That's right.
Speaking of God, those who hate God love death. There's something about when you go to a concert of death metal,
right,
somebody might get killed.
Right.
You're worshiping death. And then all of a sudden people start dying. Oh, wait a minute, what's going on? Well, you love death so much that you bought the ticket?
Yeah.
You love worshiping Satan? Well, let's have some of Satan's religion come in and shoot you. That's what these people should think about before they go to such a wicked concert. And look, I'm not condoning what these Islamic murderers did. They're wicked. They're murderers.
Oh, yeah.
But you know what? Nobody should be at a concert worshiping Satan with this drug-pushing hillbilly faggot. And that's what he is. I mean, all you have to do is just Google this band. Somebody emailed me and said, just hit Google Images, Eagles of Death Metal. And these guys are just total sodomite-looking freaks.
Okay, and then he really gets into the Paris attacks more specifically. Let's take a listen to that portion.
Yeah.
Evil pursueth sinners, Proverbs says, but to the righteous good shall be repaid. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this sinful nation of France.
Please.
Did you know that France is the only country in the world where more than 50% of the population thinks that adultery is fine?
Wow.
Did you know that? In 2013, the Pew Research Center did a poll of all these different nations all over the world. And only one nation reported back where more than half of the population said that there is nothing immoral about having an affair, as they like to call it. The Bible calls it adultery.
Yeah.
So they just think it's... I'm not saying that half of them have done it. No. I'm saying that more than half of them think it's perfectly fine.
Okay, so does this guy not get that he is the Christian version of ISIS? He would be perfectly comfortable as an ISIS member, except he just has different... he likes Jesus, and ISIS doesn't like Jesus. That's the only difference. These guys are just like ISIS.
This guy drives me crazy. First of all, he's just making so many assumptions. That the Eagles of Death Metal are a Satan-worshipping band. Where does he get that from? That they're pushing drugs? And that everyone who goes, that they worship death? I don't think so. He talks about death all the time. And bands talk about death. Does that mean you worship death?
He then went on to talk about abortion. He went on to talk about homosexuality, basically checking all the boxes for all of the causes that we hear from these right-wing religious freaks about any violent attack that happens, and of course totally inconsistent, totally incongruous. When it's a tornado in the Midwest where it's anti-gay, it's because of acceptance of homosexuality in New York State. But when it's Sandy, then it's because of what's going on in New Jersey. I mean, it's just cherry-picking whatever it is they want. I'm not religious, Lewis, but I hear the devil every time this guy opens his mouth.
This, I think, is probably the worst of the worst. When of all the preachers, whatever you call them, all the religious figures we've covered, I think this guy is by leaps and bounds the worst.
Let's talk about Black Lives Matter. Protesters at Dartmouth University, Black Lives Matter protesters disrupted students who appeared to just be studying in a quiet library. They reportedly were hurling profanity at white students and physically pushing others. Here's just a little bit of the video from this Black Lives Matter protest in a quiet library.
Black Lives Matter! 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 Black Lives Matter!
All right, that gives us a sense of what's going on. So reportedly, some of the protesters were also saying, F you, you filthy white Fs, F you and your comfort, F you, you racist S's. One of the protesters posted online that they were ashamed of what the protest turned into. So even some of those who initially thought this was a good idea, saying that they were very displeased with what this turned into. Lewis, I've made it very clear. I support almost all of the goals of Black Lives Matter. I agree with Black Lives Matter with regard to the problems in society that they have pointed out. But what will they achieve by protesting a quiet library? I don't get it. This will get attention. I don't think it's attention that will catalyze credibility. I don't think it's attention that will catalyze change. Who am I to give advice, though? And every time I talk about this, people email me. They say, David, you're not black. You can't comment on this. Your comments are irrelevant. Fine, then ignore my comments. But these are my comments, and I do not understand what is going on here.
Yeah, well, right. If no one had their cell phone out and recorded it, would there even be, would anyone even know, except the people who did it and The library, it's really not that busy a library, Dave. I mean, there are much better venues for this type of thing.
Of course, and if you believe Black Lives Matter, if you believe in the movement, you have every right to demonstrate. You have every right to protest wherever you want. You have every right to disrupt whoever you want to disrupt, as long as you're not breaking any law or being violent, as some were accused of doing here. I just don't think you're going to achieve much by disrupting students who are studying. What are you going to achieve by doing that? And disrupt something bad that's going on. Go to the chancellor's mansion, or what, I don't know where the chancellor lives at Dartmouth College. At UMass, it was a very, very nice house. Go there and protest what's going on with tuition, and protest what's going on with the disproportionate lack of college degrees among non-whites in the United States. That makes sense. I could get much more behind that. But disrupting a quiet library, I do not understand. I don't think that their interests are well served here. If I'm wrong, just let me know, and I will gladly address how I'm wrong. Let's take a break. After the break, we'll talk to Jen Briney about CISA and 2 other bills that it is potentially being merged with in the House. Sarah Palin's daughter, Bristol Palin, was a very handsomely compensated spokesperson for abstinence-only education as a means of preventing sexually transmitted diseases and pregnancy and eventually needing to have an abortion because you got pregnant. And Sarah Palin was interviewed the other day about a bunch of stuff on CBS, but also about Bristol Palin being pregnant again. And Sarah Palin thinks it's all God's work. This is all God's work. She's getting chance after chance to have a baby or not have a baby. I don't know what Sarah Palin's talking about, but a lot of rationalization going on. Let's take a look at the video.
Marriage falling through. Bristol's pregnant again. That can't be how you saw this playing out. Unmarried and pregnant again.
Heck no, because being a single mom is, oh my goodness, my heart goes out to the single parents, but my enormous admiration for what it is that they're able to accomplish doing double duty. And I watch Bristol do double duty all the time, you know, with her little boy Trip. You know, I can't wait for about 45 more days, and I'm going to have a little baby granddaughter, and I'm happy about it.
You're looking at it like a blessing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Of course there are those who say, come on, this goes against everything you stand for.
Well, the cool thing about putting your faith in God is he certainly is a God of second chances and third and fourth and fifth chances.
Yes.
I screw up all the time.
Yeah, and apparently Bristol Palin is going to need a third or fourth or fifth or sixth chance not to choose to have unprotected sex outside of marriage, which supposedly is the exact activity that her abstinence-only spokespersonship is supposed to prevent. Bristol Palin is proof that what she preaches, that what Sarah Palin preaches, what Bristol Palin is very well paid or was very well paid for doing, does not work. Her daughter was a spokesperson for abstinence-only sex education, and she is pregnant outside of marriage again. And I'm not being critical of the outside of marriage part. I don't think there's any problem if 2 people want to have a baby outside of marriage. That's not me passing judgment. It's me reminding you of the double standard that Sarah Palin and her ilk passed judgment on that.
Yeah, and this is part of the reason why I don't think Sarah Palin should ever run for office again. You know what? I'm not. I mean, like you said, we're not passing judgment. I mean, this is something people do.
I'm only passing judgment on the hypocrisy.
The daughter's just as bad because she went around preaching all of this stuff too.
That's exactly
right. She's a
right.
preacher just like Sarah Palin, and they're both a couple of hypocrites. Yeah, they're 2 peas in a pod.
And I am only passing judgment on the utter moral bankruptcy, hypocrisy, and double standards inherent in these so-called pro-family right-wing teachings and the opt-out, the exemptions that exist. Well, yeah, I mean, premarital sex is a sin, and birth control is a sin, and abortion is a sin. But my daughter, who's pregnant again, in spite of her abstinence-only education outside of marriage, this is God giving her opportunities. It is a wonderful thing. It is absolutely disgusting. The moral majority disgusts me, Lewis. I was interested to read an article in the New York Times yesterday, which was posted to our David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit, which explained that Ben Carson, the Republican presidential candidate, has really been having trouble grasping foreign policy. According to his own advisors, he seems to just not get it. And this became much more clear in the last week. Ben Carson, number one, claiming that China has intervened militarily in Syria. That just didn't happen. I mean, it just flat out did not happen. And two of his top advisors said in interviews that he has struggled to master the intricacies of the Middle East and national security, and that even intense tutoring was having little effect. He is being intensely tutored, and it is having no impact. Let's take a look at that a quote from the New York Times article. Quote, "Nobody has been able to sit down with him and have him get one iota of intelligent information about the Middle East." This is according to Dwayne Claridge, a top advisor to Ben Carson on terrorism and national security. Claridge also said that Mr. Carson needs weekly conference calls to brief him on foreign policy, quote, "so we can make him smart." And then it really got bad. When Ben Carson appeared on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, I'm calling this Ben Carson's Sarah Palin moment. I'll remind you what I mean by that. This is when Sarah Palin was asked by Katie Couric during the run-up to the 2008 election, name a publication that you read, and then this happened.
And when it comes to establishing your worldview, I was curious, what newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the world?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like what one specifically, I'm curious that you...
All of them, any of them that have been in front of me over all these years. I have a vast variety of sources where we get our news to. Alaska isn't a foreign country where it's kind of suggested. It seems like, wow, how could you keep in touch with what the rest of Washington, D.C. may be thinking and doing when you live up there in Alaska? Believe me, Alaska is like a microcosm of America.
Yeah, so that was gotcha journalism. As we remember, Lewis, Chris Wallace, very similarly, asking a super simple question to Ben Carson. At least it's a question that should elicit a real answer from a leading Republican presidential candidate. You say, Dr. Carson, you want to build a coalition to fight ISIS. Well, who do you build the coalition with? In other words, name a country that is a friend of the United States, right? If we boil it down, that's the question. Name a country that is a friend of the United States. Here's how it happened. It is just embarrassing for Ben Carson. I almost feel bad for the guy.
Sir, controlling. If I may, let me just focus on the military component, because obviously after the slaughter of over 100 people, while all of those are important components, the military component is the most immediate one. And you have said that you would, as president, try to create an international coalition militarily to go after ISIS. How would you put that together? Who would you call first?
Yeah.
Well, what I was just explaining is, how we used the resources that we have. That includes some of our special ops people working in conjunction with an effective fighting force there. Those are the kinds of things that will create enthusiasm as we begin to take back the land, take back the areas, and damage their image throughout the world.
But who would you call first, specifically, to put together an international military coalition?
My point being that if we get out there and we really lead, and it appears that we're making progress, then all of the Arab states and even the non-Arab states, who I think are beginning to recognize that the jihad movement is global. It is not just local in the Middle East. But if we fight it there, they will have to pool their resources in that area, and then we won't have to necessarily fight them here. That's what I'm saying.
But can you tell us who you would call first, sir?
Round 3.
On the international scene.
I would call for all of the Arab states to be involved in this. I would call for all of our traditional allies to be involved in this. I don't want to leave anybody out, because
this is just
really,
amazing. Okay, let's stop it there. So it's the same. Sarah Palin was asked, what do you read? She said, well, I read stuff. And then the follow-up was, well, just name something. And she says, I read everything. And Ben Carson's doing the same thing. Well, who would you call? First, it's a non-answer. And then it's, well, I would call all of the Arab states and all of the non-Arab states. He would call every country, Lewis. That's who he would call.
The answer here, well, I mean, my easy answer, just say Israel. Right?
I know. I was thinking to myself, you would imagine that at a minimum, you could at least name some allies we've had, right? Say, well, the UK, we would talk to the UK, and maybe France. I mean, they're taking action. They've just been attacked. And of course, you can always say Israel, right? Say anything to avoid looking totally clueless. What do you read all of them? Who would you call all the Arab and non-Arab states? Is this going to be called a gotcha question as well?
I think it's a fair gotcha question, right? Because they know that he's not up to speed on foreign policy.
But I don't know that. I mean, you're giving the reporters credit in that they know that this guy's clueless. He presents himself as a Republican candidate. I don't think it's a gotcha question to say, who would be, in your mind, our allies if you wanted to build a military coalition? Just give us a list of countries. Name a single country.
Well, I mean, I think everyone knows that foreign policy is not this guy's strong suit.
That's for sure. Even his advisors know.
Yeah, I throw some red meat out there. Republicans love hearing about the alliance with Israel. Throw it out there.
Earlier this week, hacktivist group Anonymous declared war on ISIS. Just one day later, they took down 3,800 Twitter accounts associated with ISIS. This is their Op Paris operation. They created a new Twitter account. They set up a website open to the public, which allows anyone who comes across ISIS social media accounts to search a database, report extremists, etc. And according to Softpedia, the website is going to index ISIS members based on their real name, location, picture, Twitter, Facebook, etc. Let's take a look at a quote from Softpedia. Before the Paris attacks, Anonymous has waged war on ISIS members after the Charlie Hebdo attacks earlier this year during Operation Op ISIS. That time, the group managed to take down tens of thousands of accounts. With over 3,800 just on the first day, the group seemed more determined this time around to finally put an end to the terrorist group, adding that just before the Paris attacks, the Ghost Security Group, another secret hacking posse, revealed that they've traced Bitcoin wallets holding more than $3 million back to known ISIS members. Since the initial report of 3,800 accounts, 5,500 Twitter accounts have been taken down. This is so interesting to me, Lewis, because they are merely flagging and reporting ISIS accounts. This is all being done through the public system. There's no hacking being done here to take the accounts down. They're not taking over the account login information and closing the accounts. They are merely reporting the accounts. Now, we don't know what methods may have been used to generate that initial list of which accounts are connected to ISIS, but I feel like Anonymous, for all the fair and unfair criticisms of Anonymous, when they operate in this way, they are really avoiding some of the criticism that they can be subjected to when they are doing the doxing and the hacking for data.
Yeah, I think it's, well, I support this. You know, I'm sure there is still some traditional hacking going on behind the scenes, like you said, to gather a bit more information. But Dave, ISIS isn't playing by the rules, so yeah, why should Anonymous, right?
The fact that a militant Islamic group like ISIS has Twitter accounts and has been effectively recruiting Westerners through social media tells us that all bets are off with regard to how this group operates.
Yeah, Dave, and I understand why Twitter feels like this is something that they can't micromanage.
Right.
I mean, but, you know, it would look a little bit better if they were at least somewhat proactive about trying to stop this.
Do you prefer that Anonymous do actions like this versus the ones that you have to say, well, I may agree with the end, but I can't support the means? Give me your thoughts about this. I'm on Twitter at Pakman. Lewis is on Twitter at Lewis Motamedi.